Let's get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast. Coach Colin here. We got Joe Rogan calling out the New York Times, and it is well deserved for the disrespectful article that they put out. I'm going to wait for Joe to actually show that to you guys. I'm going to show that clip first, then a clip of Brett Weinstein talking about, alongside of Joe Rogan, talking about why it is so important to the Constitution, to freedom of speech, that Kamala Harris does not win the election. And then I'm going to show you a clip of Tucker Carlson and his guest breaks down the importance of the First Amendment in such a perfect way. I need you guys to see that. Please watch until the end. And then we're going to get into the article. We're going to get into how this person who wrote it is trying to frame it in a certain way where it's good for you to do away with the Constitution. And after that, we'll just talk a lot. Let's go.
It's insane. And the hardest part, I'm sure you have these people in your life too, but let's just take my parents for a second.
Okay.
My parents are good people, lifelong Democrats. They live in L.A., surrounded by Hollywood types. They cannot seem to grasp the fact that the party that they believed in is now doing the inverse of everything they signed up for.
Exactly.
Because the New York Times rephrases everything so it seems like the values are still there.
Right, which is wild.
It's crazy. And if you're not a New York Times reader, you can barely figure out what these people are talking about.
Did you see the article that I posted on my Instagram that's a title of a New York Times article for today?
Which one?
Jamie, pull this up. I want Brett to see this so you know this is real. This isn't the Babylon Bee. This is an actual New York Times article. You see it?
Yeah, I had it in a weird spot. Let me grab it from your Instagram.
This is so crazy. It's really hard to believe that someone would print this and the New York Times would say, yeah, we like it. Put it out there.
I'm not quite sure what to expect.
Look at this.
Oh, yeah, of course.
The Constitution is sacred. Is it also dangerous?
Right.
One of the biggest threats to American politics might be the country's founding document. What the are you talking about?
Yeah.
One of the biggest threats to America's politics might be one of the greatest documents that any country was ever founded on, if not the greatest ever.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a threat to America's politics. What politics are we talking about? Like what? How could you possibly gaslight me enough to go along with you on this?
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's on the one hand completely predictable, right?
Right.
Because there's obviously an authoritarian force there that just grinds its teeth at night over the Constitution and the fact that it prevents it from doing things that it just wants to do last week, you know? And so, of course, they're like scratching their heads like, can we come up with an argument for why it might be time to get rid of that thing? And of course, if you're a normal thinking person, this is complete insanity. But if you're a New York Times reader, I'm sure that fits with the kind of ethos that's been cultivated.
Well, this is why a person like Trump is so important to them. Because if you don't have someone that is an imminent threat on the horizon in 3 months, it's very...
An imminent threat. That is how they build up Trump. I'm just going to scroll over to the next clip we got because Brett Weinstein just breaks this down so perfectly. But there you have it, guys. That is the article. I can't believe it's something that they put out. And when I read to you how they're framing it and how they're actually connecting Trump to the need to get rid of the Constitution, you are not, sadly, you're not going to be that surprised, but you are going to be shocked at how they're trying to actually do it. It's kind of disgusting in my opinion. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I don't get how they keep doing this. Again, a lot of mask off moments lately. Let's get into this next clip.
And, you know, even those distinctions, I think, are quaint. We are now watching the fusion of corporate power and governmental power. That is the definition of fascism. We're seeing the breakdown of individual and national sovereignty, right? What the hell is the Five Eyes? Why are the intelligence apparatus of these countries conspiring against the citizens of these countries? All of the categories that we grew up with are an obstacle to seeing what's actually functioning as our antagonist here. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a national boundary. It's clearly targeting the civil liberties that make the West possible. And we're going to have to level up quickly if we are actually going to survive this.
So what's worst case scenario in your mind? Let's with all the competing factors that are happening right now, what's worst case scenario?
Well, let's leave this terrestrial, okay? There are some space weather stuff I'm pretty concerned about that we really need to have our governmental shit in order to deal with. But I'm concerned that we are facing the last opportunity to wield the power that remains in our Constitution in order to preserve the West. I really believe the West is at stake in this election. And I know that everybody will laugh and they will say, everybody always says this is the last opportunity. This time it's really dire. But I truly believe the Republic is in serious jeopardy. I believe that however it happened, the blue team has become hostile to all of the fundamental values that allow the Republic to function and that undergird the West. And when I say the West, I'm not talking about a set of countries. I'm not talking about a geographic description. I'm talking about an agreement not to rig the world in favor of your people. An agreement on a level playing field in which people are rewarded for creating wealth from which we all benefit. That system is incredibly dynamic and powerful. It increases human well-being at a rate that no other competing system has ever come close to. And it is very strong in one way. Its capacity to generate wealth is incredible, but it is vulnerable. The reason that our founding documents have the strange form that they do, the reason that the founders of the U.S. carved out all of these counterintuitive rights are that in order to stabilize that system, you needed to have an industrial strength document that prevented all sorts of threats from getting anywhere near the core of that system. So I think the worst case scenario is the next election, November, we don't beat the cheat margin. The blue team remains in power, and it dismantles the remaining protections of our civil liberties and the basis of our freedom.
And what would be the way they would go about doing that?
Well, you saw it, right? That thing you put up from the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is, look, at some level, we've got the First Amendment, which is already in tremendous peril, right? We've got Brazil turning off X, as you pointed out, threatening to ruin anybody who uses a VPN to circumvent their block. You've got Pavel Durov, who has been effectively taken hostage in France. You have
the owner of Telegram.
Yeah. You have people in Britain being arrested for speaking freely. And the U.S. is actually, in some ways, the last holdout. Why are we the last holdout? Because our First Amendment is spelled out in very clear terms, and it's difficult to get around it. And, you and I lived through an era of terrible censorship, but it had to be cryptic. Here you showed, the New York Times, was it? Experimenting with how to phrase the argument for unhooking the Constitution so that people would get used to the idea that that was being done for them. Right?
It's dangerous. The First Amendment's dangerous.
The
Constitution's dangerous. Don't you see is it dangerous? They pose the question.
But here's let's flip the topic on its head, right?
Yeah.
The founders of the U.S. enshrined counterintuitive rights, right? These were brilliant men, and they enshrined counterintuitive rights because they understood a thing or two about tyranny because they had faced it. They knew that there was no way to eliminate bad speech without eliminating necessary speech. So they said, you know what? You can't do it. There is lots of bad speech. Live with it. You know why? Because there's really uncomfortable stuff that needs to be said that you don't want anyone to have the power to eliminate, right? That's counterintuitive. Everybody, every child understands people shouldn't be allowed to say bad stuff, right? Maybe that's appropriate in a kindergarten classroom. But it's not appropriate in a civilization where we have to figure out
what's good and what's bad.
right.
And it has to be debated.
Nobody has the position from which to say which speech has no value, so that's off limits. But here's the frightening part. It's even frightening to raise this point. That First Amendment is where it is for a reason. It's the fundamental right to all of these. They placed the Second Amendment in the backup position. So what I'm telling you is I am concerned that we are, you can hear our civil liberties creaking. You can hear that document threatening to give way. You can hear the enemies of it experimenting with explaining what they're doing and why they're really the ones who are looking out for your best interests. All of these maniacs are going to make violence inevitable. We have to avoid that. We absolutely have to avoid that.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. That is something that has to be avoided at all costs because it's just so detrimental to, friends, families, kids, everybody. And it's just not the way that you want things to get sorted out. Now, this is the actual article, little paper airplane of the actual document thrown at the floor. Just so crazy to get so disrespectful with it. But this is the lady who wrote it. Her name's Jennifer. That's Jennifer there. She wrote it. Why do they all look alike? She's a sneak one though, she doesn't have the blue hair. She's like, nah, I'm not gonna do a blue hair. I want them to trust me a little bit. If I do the blue hair, I love it, but I can't do it. Her name's Jennifer. Elon Musk actually came after this as well. He said they want to overthrow the Constitution. Brett said it very beautifully, but Elon just kind of laid it out in one sentence because that's what it seems like, especially when you actually read the article and how they're actually trying to frame this. Now, let me just shrink this down a little bit for everybody so you guys can actually see this. But what they're trying to do here, and let me see if I can find the paragraph where she's trying to do this the most. But I guess, we can start right here. It says, America has long assumed that the Constitution could save us. A growing choir now wonders whether we need to be saved from it, she says. The document that's supposed to be a bulwark against authoritarianism can end up fostering the widespread cynicism that helps authoritarianism grow. Now, this is where the real, I don't know what you want to call it, propaganda, this is where it really seeps in. So now it's Trump's fault, as always. You guys know the whole narrative. It's always Trump's fault. Trump owes his political assent to the Constitution, making him a beneficiary of the document. That right there, it's like, oh, Trump benefited from it? Get rid of it. Essentially, an anti-democratic, a document that is essentially anti-democratic. And, well, you know what? A lot of people have always pointed out, constitutional republic is where you're actually at, but I don't really think it's anti-democratic in a sense. And in this day and age, increasingly dysfunctional, she wrote. After all, Trump became president in 2016 after losing the popular vote, but winning the Electoral College, Article 2. He appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court, Article 3, 2 of whom were confirmed by senators representing just 44% of the population. Article 1. Those 3 justices helped overturn Roe v. Wade, a reversal which most Americans disagreed with. It's probably the other way around, quite honestly. I'm just saying. But aside from that, you notice what she's doing. She's saying all the things that Trump was able to do was because of the Constitution. And you don't want Trump to be able to do things, right? Well, if we got rid of that Constitution, we'd really be sticking it to Trump. And there are some people who actually have the, let's not say the lack of brain cells. Let's just say the right amount of brain cells. That they'll actually look at that and go, yeah, I mean, it's old anyway. Why haven't we written anything new? We should write a new thing. Joe Rogan even used to have a joke about that. Like the forefathers would come back and be like, you didn't write anything new? No, they wouldn't. That's not what they would do. But there are some people who are going to go along with this, but that is the whole thing. That is how she's trying to frame it. And then she says at the end, one of the biggest threats to American politics might be the country's founding documents. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I can't believe that they actually put it out there. At the same time, I'm not surprised because we just saw someone get installed into a presidential nominee position. We just saw them just say 14 million votes, get out of here. And the New York Times actually wrote an article about Kamala, and they're like, isn't it wonderful? She made 100 phone calls and she didn't go to sleep until well past midnight. And that's how she became the nominee. And it's like, well, that's terrifying. She just made phone calls in a dark room to people that we're never going to know the names of. And that's how she became the nominee. That's terrifying. But the New York Times was like, isn't that amazing? Strong, independent, Indian black lady. Let's go. Oh, man. I got a little thing here. Just the last video. Tucker Carlson talking about the New York Times. I didn't know he had such a history with the New York Times.
One more thing before we go tonight. Since this show began almost 4 years ago, I've really tried not to talk about myself on the air or even use the first person pronoun. The last thing this country needs is more narcissism. It's not very interesting anyway. People who use the word I a lot tend to bore everyone but themselves. But tonight we're going to make an exception to that rule. We don't have much choice. Last week, the New York Times began working on a story about where my family and I live. As a matter of journalism, there is no conceivable justification for a story like that. The paper is not alleging we've done anything wrong, and we haven't. We pay our taxes, we like our neighbors, we've never had a dispute with anyone. So why is the New York Times doing a story on the location of my family's house? Well, you know why. To hurt us. To injure my wife and kids so that I will shut up and stop disagreeing with them. They believe in force. We've learned that. 2 years ago, a left-wing journalist publicized our home address in Washington. A group of screaming Antifa lunatics showed up while I was at work. They vandalized our home. They threatened my wife. She called 911 while hiding in a closet. A few weeks later, they showed up again at our house. For the next year, they sent letters to our home threatening to kill us. We tried to ignore it. It felt cowardly to sell our home and leave. We'd raised our kids there in the neighborhood, and we loved it. But in the end, that's what we did. We have 4 children. It just wasn't worth it. But the New York Times followed us. The paper has assigned a political activist called Murray Carpenter to write a story about where we are now. They've hired a photographer called Tristan Spinsky to take pictures. Their story about where we live is slated to run in the paper this week. Editors there know exactly what will happen to my family when it does run. I called them today and I told them, but they didn't care. They hate my politics. They want this show off the air. If one of my children gets hurt because of a story they wrote, they won't consider it collateral damage. They know it's the whole point of the exercise, to inflict pain on our family, to terrorize us, to control what we say. That's the kind of people they are. They'll deny this, of course. They'll claim it's just journalism, just the facts. Really? So how would Murray Carpenter and his photographer Tristan Spinsky feel if we told you where they live, if we put pictures of their homes on the air? What if we publicized the home address of every one of the soulless robot editors at the New York Times who assigned and managed this incitement to violence against my family? What about the media editor, Jim Windolf? We could do that. We know who they are. Would that qualify as journalism? We doubt they'd consider it journalism. They'd call it criminal behavior if we did it. And that tells you everything.
Pretty wild. Now, what actually happened in this whole saga between Tucker Carlson and the New York Times is that they did that to him. They did it again. And then when Tucker Carlson decided to call out one of the journalists by showing something she tweeted online, they hit back at him saying that this was harassment and that this was tactical what he was doing and he wanted her to get hurt. And it was so weird. They did something so malicious to him. He did not even the same thing, but definitely called them out. And then they started crying as if they were the victims. Very interesting stuff. And now, flash to 2024, they're questioning whether or not we need the Constitution in place because Trump bad. Orange man bad. Absolutely horrendous. The New York Times is the worst. Don't know what else to say towards that, guys. I just wanted to show you all that information. Very interesting stuff. Let me know what you guys think. Oh, no. I got another video. Where is that video? Oh, it's right here. I'm so sorry, guys. And this is how we're going to end it. I'm sorry if you've seen this before, but it's just perfect. And I want to make sure that people actually see this. Of course, I'm listening at double speed. This is how we're going to end it right now. Let's go.
Felt like they're going to close everything down.
Yeah. For good reason you felt that way.
Yes. And maybe maybe there's going to be some other event that will like allow them to close it down. But one of the things I really love about America is the First Amendment. It's just the most important institutional innovation in the history of humanity.
I agree with that completely.
And we should really
You grew up
protect it.
without it too. I mean,
Yeah.
it must be.
We should really protect it. We should be so coveting of it. We should, like your wife or something.
Can you, I totally agree. Hands off.
Yeah.
Can you just repeat your description of its importance historically? I'm sorry, you put it so well.
It's the most important institutional innovation in human history.
The First Amendment is the most important institutional innovation in human history.
Yes.
I love that. I think it's absolutely right. And as someone who grew up with it in a country that had it for, 200 years when I was born, you don't feel that way. It's just like, well, it's the First Amendment. It's like just part of nature, right? It's like gravity. It just exists. But as someone who, grew up in a country that does not have it, which is true of every other country on the planet.
It's the only country that has it.
You see it that way. You see it as the thing that makes America, America.
Well, the thing that makes it so that we can change course.
Yes.
Right. And the reason why, we had this, conformist mob rule mentality that people call woke. The reason that we're now past that almost, it's still kind of there, but we're on our way past that is because of the First Amendment and free speech. And again, I would credit Elon a lot for buying Twitter and letting us talk and can debate and push back on the craziness, right?
It's it's beautiful. I've been a direct beneficiary of it, as I think everyone in the country has been. So I'm not and I love Elon, but it's a little weird that like a foreigner has to do that. A foreign-born person, Elon, appreciates it in this way. It's like, it's a little depressing. Like, why didn't some American-born person do that? I guess because we don't take it.
Yeah.
Take it for granted.
I wrote a thread. It was like 10 things I like about America. I expected it to do well, but it was like 3-4 years ago. It went super viral. The Wall Street Journal covered it. Peggy Noonan, called me and it was like, I want to write a story about it. I was like, okay, it's like a Twitter thread. You can read it. But, I just like talk about normal things, free speech, one of them, but also like hard work, appreciation for talent and all of that. And it was starting to close up, right? I started to see, meritocracy kind of like being less valued and that's part of the reason why I wrote that thread. And what I realized is like, most Americans just don't think about that and don't really value it as much.
I agree.
And so maybe you do need foreigners.
I think that's absolutely right. But why do you I have seen, I hate to say so far from a user perspective.
Man, the way that he just broke that down right there, that's exactly it. It's so important and so many people take it for granted, and it is the last stand, because once that goes away, once that's not a thing, the rest of the world, all of the communism, the socialism, the authoritarianism, the tyrannical dictators that are around, it just gets to swarm. It just swarms after that. Once America goes down, that's it. Because right now, a lot of those places are, they're doing what they do. China's doing what it does, Russia, all that, but they're contained, and a lot of people don't realize. And I'm sure there's so many people in the comments will be like, actually, it's because of it. It's because America is still America. And despite everything you're seeing, and I know you think everything works just like TikTok and it's just 15 seconds away, America is still the superpower in the world, the military power of the world. Now, I know a lot of people think that's going to go away in the next 2 years, but I'm sorry to say, and I'm actually proud to say, no, it's not. And believe me, that Constitution has a huge part to do with it. Anyways, guys, I just want to wrap it up here. Like, subscribe, turn on the notifications. That's what I say, right? Helps the channel tremendously. Exactly. I'm out.